What are the top 3 symptoms of repressed anger? Knowing these will help you uncover your own anger and begin to heal it. Anger is one of the most commonly suppressed emotions. It's not socially acceptable to express it, but this has nefarious effects on your well-being and behaviour, and can even lead to depression and sadness and melancholy, as we'll talk about. I think it's particularly dangerous in men since we naturally tend to have greater levels of anger and aggression. So let's cover these top 3 symptoms. So, what is repressed anger? Now, I spoke about this in one of my episodes on when I was talking about my LSD experiences and how it helped me reintegrate my shadow and my repressed anger. And I also speak about it in my accompanying article, which I've linked to in the description. But let me talk a little bit about what repressed anger actually is. I think it's important before we talk about the symptoms so that you understand where the symptoms come from. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that we all have a degree of repressed anger, um, and the greater it is, the more pain it causes us. We actually all know what repressed anger is, we've all seen it, but sadly, it's not common knowledge. So maybe you've already seen it, but you just weren't aware that you've already seen it. Um, all repressed emotions and traits are part of the you that you can't see, not just your own anger, but all qualities, any psychological qualities that you don't acknowledge in yourself, but that you have. And this actually goes back to Jung and Freud. It's not a new concept, the concept of repressed emotions or the shadow or repressed anger. With repressed anger, what basically happens is that you are angry, both perhaps in the moment and as a more general theme. You have the emotion of anger, but it happens unconsciously and unknowingly. It feels like your own anger is outside of you, pointing back at you. Um, and think of anger not necessarily as just outright rage, but more as the ability to move forward, to move towards, to engage, to act, to effect change. It's aggression, but not rage. It's the ability to move forward. That's the way to think of anger. Though it is true we can repress rage, and if you repress rage, well, that's a particularly nasty emotion to repress because you're basically going to feel, as we'll talk about in a minute, you're going to feel all the effects of your own rage pointed back at yourself. That's what happens when you repress your emotions. When it comes to the shadow, and the shadow doesn't mean repressed negative qualities or repressed unpleasant qualities necessarily. It just means all of our unacknowledged traits, the shadow. It consists of positive qualities too. When you're thinking of the shadow or repressed traits or emotions, think Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So by day, we're this upright citizen. We have this is like the light side, the side that everyone sees, and then there's a dark side that is underground and it's hidden. And it's dark in the sense that it's hidden, not this in the sense that it's necessarily something that we don't want to see. We want to see all our repressed qualities. Only then can we really direct them. I'm not saying we act out all of our qualities without consideration for other people and for the law and all this, but once they're out of the shadow, you can then take control of them. And the darkness refers to the fact that they are beyond your control and they're acting for you. You're not acting through them. So that's what repressed anger is. It's anger that is in the shadow, that is unconsciously, unknowingly acting. And it's not something that you have full control over and that you've integrated into your personality. So, symptom one of repressed anger is quite simple. It's one that accompanies pretty much all shadow qualities. It's kind of the simplest symptom of having a repressed characteristic or emotion. And it's that you can't stand angry people. When we repress some sort of emotion in ourselves, basically what happens is we can't stand other people who openly express it. And it's quite simple. We find this quality repulsive in ourselves, so it's not surprising that we're going to find it repulsive in other people too. And actually, Ken Wilber, who's one of my favourite philosophers, likens shadow material to a Geiger counter. A Geiger counter is basically an instrument that you use to detect radioactive activity, and you can hear it. It beeps when the more radioactivity there is, the more it beeps. This happens with shadow material. What basically happens is as we go through life, people who we come up against our repressed traits in other people all the time. We're going to, with anger, for example, we're going to come into contact with anger all the time because it's such a fundamental human emotion. And when we experience other people being angry, it annoys us, it activates our shadow. And like this radioactive material does to a Geiger counter, we start beeping inside and it creates this tension, this annoyance inside us, and we don't like it. And what's tricky about anger is that we also, it's not just that other people expressing anger will annoy us, it's that we actually project our own anger onto them. This is what happens with emotions, repressed emotions in the shadow. We project them onto others. And basically, what happens is it makes other people appear angry, even if they're not. Now, when they really are angry, we're going to experience double the anger. We're going to experience their anger, and we're going to experience our own projected anger in them. And these people are going to seem extra repulsive to us because of that. So put those together, you realize that if we have repressed anger, we're going to be very intolerant of people who can freely express their anger because it's just completely intolerable to us. And actually, we experience double the anger we usually would if we had fully integrated our own anger. The second top symptom of repressed anger is dreams. And this has been a huge source of wisdom for me. By decoding my dreams, I was able to uncover a huge heap of my own repressed anger and reintegrate it actually with a bit of work. Now, if you're not if you're not done a lot of reading, not well versed in the subject of dreams, I just want you to know that dreams aren't random or meaningless. Like sometimes we have this idea that it's just like random brain activity. It's our brain processing everything we've experienced. I think there might be a part of that that's true. But actually, dreams are highly intelligent. They're sort of like little allegories that point us to our repressed side. A lot of what comes out in our dream is our repressed emotions and our repressed desires. And there are actually signature dream patterns for different emotions and different traits that we are repressing or desires. And for anger, it's really the same. So if you've got repressed anger, there are certain dream patterns that are very likely uh, that you'll experience. I'm not saying that I can tell you down to the exact details, but in terms of like the pattern and the overall structure, it's quite predictable. Being chased is a very common one with repressed anger, and I've heard lots of people telling me stories of being chased in their dreams, and it's really no coincidence. In my own case, I went through a period of dreaming about being chased by big animals. I'm talking lions, bulls, rhinos, like these huge animals that could kill you in about 10 seconds. And it's funny because at that time when I realized I was having dreams like this, I was actually studying the shadow. And soon I realized that these dream animals were what basically they were doing is they were embodying the very traits that I couldn't embody. It was like subconsciously I was creating these big animals. They were part of my subconscious trying to tell me, hey, this is all the stuff that you can't embody. Like this is all these traits that you have, but you can't consciously own them. So basically the big animals, if you're experiencing being chased, the animals or the things that are chasing you aren't They aren't the animals, they are really you. They're your subconscious traits expressing themselves. And here's the kicker with being chased. You might think, well, when I get chased in a dream, I just feel scared and I feel like I'm about to get eaten. Yeah, because this is what we do with our emotions. We project them outside ourselves and we experience the effect of that emotion. So if someone gets really angry at us in real life and it feels like they're about to attack us, hey, we feel scared, genuinely scared, because we are actually threatened in the real world. In the dream, however, you're basically just creating the dream is a creation of it's your creation. So when your anger is projected outside into these animals, what's happening is you're feeling the effects. You're not feeling the strength and the power and the bullishness of those animals, which is what you should really be feeling if you were to fully integrate this aggression and anger. You just experience the effects of being their prey, which is what you'd experience in real life, fear about feeling you're small, exposed, about to be eaten. Um, so soon what I started doing was I started doing shadow work with my anger. And funnily enough, the animals in my dreams, I was still having dreams of being chased, but the animals started becoming smaller. So instead of being chased by giant lions and bears, what actually happened was that I'd have wasps trying to sting me in my dreams, or I'd have little birds trying to peck me or annoy me. And it still wasn't pleasant, but it was nowhere as fearsome as those giant animals. So if you're having dreams of being chased, that is a very common anger symptom. And basically, more in general, if other sort of animals or people are in your dreams are angry, that is your repressed anger. That's what it is. Those characters are embodying the very traits that you can't. I'll also say that fearsome dream characters, in my opinion, they indicate quite a high level of repression because basically in our dreams, if you watch carefully, in your dreams, you basically express desires and traits, personality traits, and emotions that you won't allow yourself to express in everyday life because you've got a lot of filters, and we're also in a polite society where we can't do certain things. What happens is we express them in our dreams. That's where we sort of psychologically we allow ourselves to express them. However, if they're if you can't even express them in your dreams, like this anger, for example, in your dreams, and there's a character in your dream expressing anger, where it's human or otherwise, um, it means that you're projecting in your dream. It's not that you're projecting in everyday life, you're projecting your shadow in your dream. So it's like the next level of repression. However, if you find that, for example, in your dreams, you can get very angry at people more than normal, perhaps like a demon has come out and all of a sudden you're like doing crazy stuff in your dreams that you wouldn't do in everyday life, you still have repressed anger because it's kind of like all that unexpressed anger and aggression is coming out in your dreams. Maybe you're going over the top in your dreams, but um, it's still there. It's still coming out in your dreams. Um, so it's not so repressed. That's good. At least you can own it when you're asleep. But there's still repressed anger there. So whether you're getting angry in your dreams more than usual, more than you normally do, or other people are being angry and aggressive and threatening in your dreams, that's repressed anger. And this is kind of the tragedy of repressed anger. And not just in dreams, just in general, but not only you're not able to embody this powerful emotion, this powerful drive, this aggression and anger, and moving forward and make it and acting. Not only can't embody that, you're experiencing the symptoms of your anger and your aggression pointed back at you because it's projected, um, like sadness and fear and smallness to various levels. That's kind of the tragedy of repressed anger. So it's very good to start reintegrating this emotion. Okay, finally, the third top symptom of repressed anger is maybe quite surprising, but depression, sadness, and melancholy. Now, you might suspect why these are symptoms of repressed anger, but let me just explain why this is true. As I've said, with all emotions, but with anger especially, it's quite nefarious. When we repress our anger, what happens is we eventually project it onto the world, and it seems that other people are angry at us. In reaction to this, we experience the usual symptoms of being a victim of anger or aggression, which is fear and smallness and um, tension. Now, if that goes on long enough, what you're going to do is you're going to experience those symptoms all the time because your anger is so projected that you're just going to experience it all the time. It's going to be continually there, bugging you. And this, over time, the sense of fear and sadness and smallness, this leads to depression and melancholy. And psychologists will tell you that sadness is internalized anger. It's anger directed against yourself. Think of this as like a phantom limb. When you have a phantom limb, I don't, but when you do, you can, even though there's no limb, it's when you have a leg cut off or an arm cut off or your hand, you can actually still feel the limb in many occasions. Not if it's a phantom limb, you can. You can't see it, you can't feel it, it's not really there, but it still causes pain, it's still there. Anger is kind of like that. It's like you don't have your own anger, but you can feel the effects of it. It's almost like having an angry person following you all the time. That's why it leads to sadness and depression and melancholy. What happens is when we have repressed anger, we store it up. And because it's not getting released, it just gets projected outside and it gets directed against ourselves. It's much better to shout and to swear and to punch pillows and to channel it somehow rather than just to sit there with it. Like if you're feeling really angry about a situation, maybe forget the niceties and forget trying to come across in a certain way. I'm not saying you embarrass yourself in public or anything, but just get it out. Get it out. Don't let it sit in there. Otherwise, you're going to eventually direct it against yourself. That's why often after feeling very angry, we feel sad, I think, because we're not getting it out. It just bubbles inside us and it eventually gets projected back towards ourselves. It's kind of a tragedy that our culture makes victims of depressed people. The general attitude is sort of poor you, you're depressed, what terrible luck, something terrible must have happened to you. And that is a definite cause of depression, things happening to us that are kind of beyond our control. But when we apply this to everyone and we don't realize that in many cases we actually cause our own depression, there's many mechanisms behind that, one of which is repressed anger. We're not the victim, we're actually the perpetrator of our own sadness and depression. And the root cause is rarely found because we just give people tablets and we give them talk therapy that doesn't really give them insight into the cause of the depression. And the only way you're going to find this is if you have a psychoanalyst work with you, or you learn about the shadow and you start doing work to unearth your own shadow. And if you don't, you're going to have this problem for a long time, this persistent sense of melancholy and sort of hollowness. And it's quite tragic. I know people that have this, I think, and it's really not it's not healthy. So if you notice any of these symptoms in yourself, don't guilt yourself. Our shadow is a survival mechanism at the end of the day. Our repressed anger, particularly, is a survival mechanism because anger isn't socially acceptable. It's quite unpleasant to be on the receiving end of someone else's aggression and anger, particularly if your own aggression is repressed. And very, very early in life, we're taught to repress it. We're not really taught to channel it. We're just taught to repress it and to not express it. But know that it's possible to re-own it and to channel it appropriately when you can, And recognizing the symptoms is the first step. So that's the goal of this episode, is to help you recognize these symptoms in yourself. So in the next episode, we're going to look more deeply at how to reintegrate your repressed anger if you realize that you have these symptoms. For now, make sure to subscribe to the channel, check out the accompanying article on the symptoms of repressed anger, and I'll see you soon for more.